Many people believe that leaving Jehovah's Witnesses simply means closing the door of a kingdom hall and moving on with life. But those who have actually left know the truth. The door that closes behind you leaves an echo that lasts for years, sometimes forever. It's a heavy silence, made of memories, regrets, and unanswered questions that haunt you during sleepless nights. It's not just about abandoning a religion, but facing the existential void of a life shaped by constant fear of Armageddon and blind obedience to imperfect men who claim to be God's only channel of communication on earth. The reality of leaving Jehovah's Witnesses goes far beyond what any outsider can imagine. It's like waking up from a deep sleep after decades of slumber, only to discover that the world kept spinning while you remained motionless, waiting for an end that never came. It's confronting the brutal truth that you were part of a system that didn't just control your beliefs, but every aspect of your daily life. What to read, what to think, who to associate with, how to dress, what to celebrate, whom to love. Ex-members across America and around the world carry stories that are rarely told publicly, silenced by shame, trauma, and isolation. These are dreams abandoned because they believed the end would come in this generation. These are families completely shattered by a cruel doctrine that places blind loyalty to 8 men in Warwick, New York, above unconditional love between parents and children. These are birthdays never celebrated that left voids in the hearts of children who grew up feeling different. These are hugs denied at funerals, words of comfort forbidden in moments of grief, educational and career opportunities sacrificed on the altar of a promise that never materialized and constantly changed. These regrets run deep, painful, and for many, impossible to completely erase. They transform into invisible scars that only those who have lived through this traumatic experience can truly understand. They are wounds that bleed in silence, because society doesn't understand the complexity of systematic spiritual abuse they suffered for years or decades. Today, you're going to learn about the 7 biggest regrets that every ex-Jehovah's Witness carries in silence, those that wake them up at night, that accompany them in moments of reflection, and that form an inseparable part of their healing process. And I want to invite you to go further. If this story speaks to your heart, if you recognize your pain in these words, leave your comment below, share your experience without fear of judgment, or simply write, "Me too," so others know they're not alone. This isn't just a video. It's a sacred space to give voice to those who were brutally silenced for years. It's a place where your story matters and your pain is valid. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with me until the end, because you'll identify more than you imagine, and perhaps find some healing in these shared words. 1. Having lost years of life waiting for the end. Living decades believing that Armageddon was just around the corner is probably the most devastating and universally shared regret carried by ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Imagine waking up every day for 10, 20, 30, 40 years or more, convinced that the world would end before next year, before the next season, before your children grew up. This apocalyptic mindset doesn't just shape your daily decisions. It literally steals your ability to live in the present and plan for a real, tangible future. Thousands of ex-members tearfully recount how they stopped pursuing promising careers, rejected life-changing professional growth opportunities, and consciously avoided making any long-term plans because, why bother, if Jehovah is going to destroy this system soon? The phrase, "we're in the last days of the last days," became the soundtrack of their lives, dictating every important decision. Some sold valuable properties at ridiculous prices, spent life savings on kingdom work, went into debt to attend assemblies and conventions, all believing there would be no future consequences because the new world would be here before this generation passed away. Others rejected life insurance, pension plans, retirement investments, considering them as lack of faith in Jehovah's promises. The existential shock comes when they realize, at 40, 50, 60 years old or more, that life relentlessly moved forward and they were left behind, stuck in a time bubble. They see their former high school classmates who became doctors, engineers, successful lawyers, with paid-off homes, children in universities, solid retirement plans, while they struggle to make ends meet with precarious jobs and no prospects. They watch with growing bitterness how the world not only didn't end, but continued evolving, progressing technologically, improving in many aspects, while they remained frozen in an apocalyptic survival mentality that never came to pass. The feeling of being cheated out of the most productive years of their lives is overwhelming. The bitterness intensifies exponentially when they understand the real history of prophetic dates that systematically failed. 1914 that was supposed to bring Armageddon, 1925 that promised the resurrection of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, 1975 that was going to be the definitive end, the generation that would not pass away. That was reinterpreted multiple times when it started dying. And yet, like spiritual zombies, they continued waiting, trusting, wasting precious and irreplaceable years of their lives on a promise that constantly changed shape but never came true. 2. Not getting higher education or building a career. Higher education is spiritually dangerous. Universities are full of independent thinking that leads away from Jehovah. Why study if the end is near? Those who pursue higher education show lack of faith in God's promises. These poisonous phrases echoed for decades in kingdom halls across America, systematically shaping the decisions of millions of promising young witnesses and condemning them to a life of economic limitations. The Watchtower developed sophisticated anti-education propaganda. Articles in magazines showing young people who rejected universities to become happy pioneers, testimonies of people who supposedly drifted away from God through studying, manipulated statistics about moral corruption on college campuses, and constant social pressure for parents to view their children's higher education as a spiritual threat. Many ex-members recount with deep pain and a sense of irreparable loss how they rejected full scholarships to prestigious universities that would have opened doors to extraordinary careers. Others tell how their completely indoctrinated parents forced them to reject once-in-a-lifetime academic opportunities, or how they themselves, brainwashed from childhood, genuinely saw education as Satan's trap designed to distance them from the truth. Some accounts are particularly heartbreaking. Young people with exceptional talents in mathematics, sciences, arts, or literature, who were systematically discouraged by elders who had barely finished high school. Brilliant students who abandoned university careers midway because congregational leaders told them they were putting worldly things above Jehovah's things, as if intellectual development were incompatible with spirituality. The long-term result is absolutely devastating. At 30, 40, 50 years old, they find themselves desperately competing in a globalized job market that demands technical and professional qualifications they don't have. They see how their educational limitations inexorably condemn them to poorly paid, repetitive jobs with no real growth possibilities, while carrying families and economic responsibilities that require financial stability they cannot achieve. The situation becomes more cruel when they observe that the Watchtower itself employs lawyers with doctorates from prestigious universities to defend their legal interests, highly trained engineers and architects to build their complexes, specialized doctors to care for governing body members, accountants and financiers to manage their millions. All the higher education they denied their followers. Some desperately attempt to resume studies after leaving, but the reality is relentlessly harsh. Studying at 40 or 50 years old while working 60 hours a week to survive, with children to support, mortgages to pay, and years of educational and technological disadvantage to overcome, is an almost impossible battle to win. The regret becomes deeper and more bitter when they realize they not only lost opportunities for themselves, but unconsciously condemned their own children to the same destructive cycle of academic limitation, intellectual poverty, and economic dependence. 3. Having cut off relationships with friends and family. The brutal, disfellowshipping policy of Jehovah's Witnesses is probably one of the most cruel, dehumanizing, and psychologically destructive practices that exists in any modern religious group. This practice, which divides families and destroys relationships that had lasted decades, leaves deep emotional scars that often never completely heal. Ex-members carry the crushing weight of having actively participated, as unconscious executioners, in the systematic isolation of loved ones who were expelled or who simply decided to distance themselves from the organization. The machinery of isolation is perfect in its cruelty. One day you have a son, father, mother, brother who loves you unconditionally, and the next day, by organizational decree, that person must be treated as if they had died. It doesn't matter the years of shared love, mutual sacrifices, the blood bonds that nature created. Everything is subordinated to blind loyalty to 8 men in corporate offices in Warwick, New York. Many ex-witnesses tearfully recount how they completely cut off communication with adult children, elderly parents, siblings, lifelong best friends, beloved spouses, and family members who had been fundamental pillars of their lives, simply because the Watchtower ordered them to do so through their publications and talks. They remember absolutely heartbreaking moments that haunt them in nightmares, deliberately crossing the street to avoid greeting a disfellowshipped brother who looked destroyed, abruptly hanging up the phone when an expelled child called desperately asking for help in moments of crisis, or physically denying their presence when beloved family members knocked on the door on significant dates. The most brutal testimonies include parents who didn't attend their children's weddings, grandparents who never met their grandchildren, siblings who didn't speak for decades while living in the same city, mothers who rejected calls from children going through severe depression or suicide attempts. The organization trained them to see these acts of cruelty as tough love that would eventually bring the strays back to the fold. The most cruel and devastating irony comes when they themselves are disfellowshipped for questioning doctrines, for apostasy, or for not meeting organizational standards. Suddenly, they experience firsthand, with overwhelming intensity, the same emotional pain they caused others for years. Their own children slam doors in their faces, their elderly parents deny them a simple phone call on their birthday, their siblings act as if they had physically died, their decades-long best friends completely ignore them in public places. The vicious cycle of isolation is completed in the most brutal way possible, and they understand with devastating clarity the real magnitude of emotional damage they caused when they were on the other side. They understand the terror, loneliness, desperation felt by the people they systematically rejected for years. Some ex-members make heroic attempts to rebuild relationships after leaving, writing emotional letters asking for forgiveness, knocking on doors that once opened for them, calling phone numbers that once answered with joy. But they discover the most bitter reality. That emotional damage is frequently irreparable. People they loved deeply died without possible reconciliation, taking the pain of rejection to the grave. Children grew up completely without the presence of grandparents who adored them but chose the organization over natural love. Solid marriages were completely destroyed by blind loyalty to a corporation that would never know their names. The regret becomes unbearably deeper when they realize they consciously sacrificed the most sacred, precious, and irreplaceable bonds of human experience. Unconditional family love, for imperfect men in corporate offices who change doctrines capriciously and who will never suffer the consequences of the cruel policies they impose. 4. Not enjoying holidays and special moments. Birthdays are pagan. Christmas honors Satan. New Year's celebrations are worldly. Thanksgiving promotes nationalism. These toxic teachings deprived millions of American Jehovah's Witnesses of creating precious family memories they can never recover, isolating them from the very fabric of American cultural life. Ex-members describe the profound sadness of remembering their children looking longingly at neighbors' Christmas decorations, unable to participate in the joy that surrounded them every December. They speak of the pain of seeing their parents grow old without ever celebrating a birthday, without family photos on special occasions, without traditions that create generational bonds. They recall the isolation of being the only family in the neighborhood not participating in Halloween, the awkwardness of children having to leave classrooms during holiday parties, the emptiness of Thanksgiving tables without gratitude celebrations. The American context makes this particularly painful because holidays are deeply woven into the social and cultural fabric of life here. Missing Christmas means missing the magic of childhood wonder, the joy of giving and receiving, the warmth of family gatherings during winter months. Missing Thanksgiving means never experiencing the uniquely American tradition of reflecting on blessings and gathering with extended family. Missing the 4th of July means never sharing in the communal celebration of freedom and independence that defines American identity. When they leave the organization, many desperately try to compensate by celebrating everything: belated birthdays, double Christmases, late graduation parties. But the reality is that you can't recover a child's first Christmas morning wonder, the smile of a grandparent blowing out candles at 70, or a teenager's excitement receiving their first birthday gift. The void is especially felt when looking through family photo albums. Pages and pages of ordinary photos from meetings and assemblies, but no celebrations, no moments of pure joy, no family traditions that connect generations. Their memories are marked by absence, by what never was, by joy that was stolen from them in the name of religious purity that turned out to be false. The grandchildren who will never know family traditions, the children who grew up feeling different and excluded in American society, the marriages that never celebrated special anniversaries. Every date on the American calendar becomes a reminder of lost opportunities to create bonds and memories that would have lasted forever. 5. Having given money and time blindly. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. But in practice, the Watchtower demanded both. Ex-witnesses carry the bitter regret of having given not only decades of their lives, but also their economic resources to an organization that turned out to be a multimillion-dollar real estate empire. Thousands of pioneers recount how they sacrificed complete careers to preach 70, 90, 140 hours monthly, living in poverty while believing they were doing the most important work on earth. They worked part-time at poorly paid jobs to be able to dedicate most of their days to knocking on doors, distributing literature that the Watchtower charged them for. Entire families donated inheritances, sold properties, gave life savings for kingdom work. Some even left their assets in wills to the organization, believing they were securing eternal blessings. Others went into debt to attend expensive assemblies, to build kingdom halls, to finance the expansion of an organization that promised them spiritual rewards. The awakening is brutal when they discover the reality. The Watchtower owns properties worth billions of dollars, has secret bank accounts, invests in the stock market, and maintains an army of lawyers to protect their financial interests. Meanwhile, faithful members who gave everything live in poverty, without retirement savings, without properties, without financial security. Seeing how the organization sold Brooklyn properties for hundreds of millions while they struggle to pay rent, watching how leaders live comfortably while preaching voluntary poverty to them, discovering that their donations funded not only the work, but also million-dollar settlements to silence abuse victims. The regret becomes indignation when they understand they were financially exploited by a religious corporation that enriched itself with their naivety and devotion. In the American context, this is particularly painful because it goes against fundamental values of financial independence and the American dream. Many gave up opportunities to build wealth, own homes, start businesses, or invest for retirement, all core elements of American economic culture and personal freedom. 6. Not seeking psychological or medical help. The Watchtower has cultivated for decades a deep distrust of psychology, psychiatry, and certain medical treatments. Witnesses were taught to view therapy as worldly wisdom that could weaken their faith, and mental health problems as lack of spirituality or trust in Jehovah. Thousands of ex-members carry the weight of having suffered depression, anxiety, panic disorders, and trauma without treatment for years or decades. They believed that more personal study, more meetings, more preaching would cure their emotional pain. Some rejected psychiatric medications because elders told them it was lack of faith, or that Jehovah would provide healing. The blood transfusion ban caused unnecessary tragedies. Parents who watched their children die from rejecting treatments that could have saved them, adults who risked their lives for doctrine they later discovered was fallible human interpretation, not absolute divine commandment. Many developed severe phobias toward doctors, hospitals, and psychological treatments. Fear of displeasing Jehovah kept them trapped in cycles of avoidable suffering. Some rejected family therapies that could have saved marriages, or addiction treatments that could have prevented tragedies. In America, where mental health awareness and treatment are increasingly recognized as essential healthcare, this rejection becomes even more tragic. The American healthcare system, despite its flaws, offers extensive mental health resources that were deliberately avoided due to organizational pressure. When they finally leave and seek professional help, they discover years of accumulated damage. Untreated childhood trauma, chronic depression exacerbated by years of guilt and fear, social anxiety derived from isolation from the world, post-traumatic stress disorder from spiritual abuse. The regret intensifies when they realize how much unnecessary suffering they could have avoided with early and appropriate treatment. 7. Not having left earlier. This is perhaps the most universally shared regret among ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, the painful realization that they could have awakened years, even decades earlier. Many recount specific moments in their lives when they had doubts, when something didn't add up, when their conscience screamed that something was wrong, but they chose to ignore those signals. If I had investigated when I was 25 instead of 45, if I had trusted my instinct when I saw the hypocrisy of the elders, if I had listened to my brother when he warned me about the organization. These phrases constantly echo in the minds of those who finally found freedom. The weight of regret multiplies when they think about everything they lost during those extra years of blind obedience. Educational opportunities that won't return, relationships that deteriorated irreparably, children who grew up under the same indoctrination, decades of life lived according to false expectations. Some vividly remember the moment they knew, deep in their hearts, that the organization wasn't the truth. But fear of losing family, friends, and community kept them trapped for additional years. Others describe a gradual awakening process they could have accelerated if they had had more courage or information. Lost youth is irreplaceable. The years of 20s, 30s, 40s spent serving an organization that turned out to be false will never return. The energy, passion, adaptability they had when younger was lost with the time they wasted waiting for an Armageddon that never came. The regret becomes deeper when they see other ex-members who left earlier and built fuller lives, or when they observe people who were never witnesses enjoying freedoms they're just discovering at advanced ages. In the American context, this is particularly poignant because American culture emphasizes individual freedom, personal achievement, and the pursuit of happiness, all things that were systematically suppressed during their years in the organization. These 7 regrets represent just the surface of the deepest and most complex wounds carried by millions of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses around the world, in silence, in solitude, in the privacy of their homes where no one can see their tears. They are not simply casual laments for wrong decisions that anyone might have, but the deep existential pain of entire lives completely shaped, controlled, and manipulated by a totalitarian system that promised absolute truth and delivered absolute control, that offered eternal hope and planted paralyzing fear, that preached unconditional love and practiced cruel and systematic isolation. The tragedy of these regrets goes beyond individual pain. They represent complete generations of destroyed families, wasted talents, human potential crushed under the weight of doctrines that constantly changed but always demanded blind obedience. They represent millions of children who grew up without celebrations, without adequate education, without the freedom to explore their natural talents and passions, conditioned from infancy to fear independent thinking and submit their will to an organization that presented itself as God's only communication channel on earth. The psychological impact of these regrets is devastating because it's not just about individual wrong decisions, but about an entire life structure that turned out to be an elaborate lie. It's discovering that the complete frame of reference from which you made the most important decisions of your life, whom to marry, what to study, where to live, how to raise your children, how to relate to family, how to plan the future, was based on false doctrines and empty promises. The healing path for those who manage to leave is not linear, not quick, and definitely not easy. It requires extraordinary courage to face years or decades of decisions made under sophisticated psychological manipulation. It requires the painful humility of recognizing that you were a victim of massive deception, but also that, unconsciously, you participated in perpetuating that deception to others. It requires completely rebuilding your personal identity after decades of blind obedience to external authority, and finding authentic purpose and meaning in a world that was painted as a mortal enemy during most of their lives. Healing requires facing the complex grief for the life you could have had, for opportunities lost forever, for relationships that were irreparably destroyed. It requires learning to forgive yourself for decisions you made with limited information and under extreme psychological pressure. It requires developing new social skills, new ways of thinking critically, new capacity to trust your own judgment after years of being trained to distrust your own perceptions and instincts. But amid all this pain, there is real and tangible hope. Every ex-witness who finds the extraordinary courage to share their story publicly, despite the risk of losing family and friends still inside, is planting seeds of freedom in the minds of others still trapped. Every family that manages to reunite after years of forced separation represents a victory against the system that tried to divide them permanently. Every person who decides to seek professional help to heal their trauma is breaking generational chains of pain and dysfunction. Every ex-witness who manages to build a new authentic life, based on their own values and free decisions, is honoring not only their own liberation but also the sacrifice of all those who never managed to escape. Every act of unconditional love toward family members still inside, despite constant rejection, is planting seeds of doubt about the cruelty of organizational policies. If you are an active Jehovah's Witness and deeply identify with these stories, if you feel these words resonate with doubts you've had in secret, remember that it's never too late to question, to investigate with an open mind, to take control of your own life and decisions. Your life belongs to you, not to an organization. Your mind belongs to you, not to imperfect men who claim to speak for God. Your heart belongs to you, and it has the wisdom to distinguish between true love and manipulative control. If you've already left and carry these regrets like heavy stones in your heart, please have deep compassion and patience with yourself. Always remember that you made the best decisions you could with the information available at that time, under circumstances of extreme psychological pressure that most people will never face. You are not responsible for being a victim of sophisticated manipulation. Your value as a human being is not defined by mistakes you made under mind control, but by the courage you demonstrate every day to build an authentic life in freedom. Life continues after the Watchtower, and it can be more beautiful, more authentic, and more fulfilling than you ever imagined when you were inside. And although we cannot recover the years we lost, although we cannot undo all the damage that was caused, we can honor those lost years by building an authentic future, free and full of the experiences, relationships, and achievements we always deserved but were denied. Your story matters more than you can imagine. Your pain is completely valid and deserves to be recognized. Your freedom is not only possible but is your fundamental right as a human being. Your voice, which was silenced for so long, has power to heal not only your own wounds but also to illuminate the path for others still walking in the darkness of mind control. And always remember, especially on the most difficult days when the weight of regrets feels unbearable, you are not alone on this healing journey. Thousands of people around the world share your pain, understand your struggles, and celebrate every step you take toward authentic freedom. Your liberation is part of something bigger, a massive awakening of consciousness that is changing lives across the planet. The future you build in freedom will be the best tribute to all the years you lost, and the best revenge against the system that tried to steal your life.